If you really believe that, you're a lunatic. And let's just say that out loud. You're a lunatic.
皆さん、こんにちは。この動画は後で全部流しますので、その前に少し背景の説明をします。背景の説明がいらない方は、説明欄にある時間軸から動画の部分に飛んでください。以前、アメリカの親たちと教育委員会の間で繰り広がっている戦いに関する字幕付きの動画をアップしたことがあります。このチャンネルのチャンネルページに入ると、すぐに出るようになってますので、まだ見たことがない方は後でぜひ見てください。このチャンネルで何回か話をしたことがありますが、左翼は長年、教育、メディア、芸術の分野で浸透し続けてきた結果、人の思想に影響を与えるこれらの分野はかなり左翼に取られています。今回お話をするのはその教育の分野です。左翼がアメリカの教育領域に大きな影響力があるから、学校で批判的人種理論を教えるようになって、たくさんの親がそれに反対をしています。批判的人種理論、略して CRT 理論。その理論では、白人に生まれつきの人種差別の罪、現在がある。黒人、またはラテン系は被害者。アメリカは人種差別の国で、現在がある国。人種主義と反人種主義の2つの陣営しかない。強制的に社会の資源を再分配すべき、などのような世界観です。これはマルクス主義の世界観と同じで、社会を各階級に分けて、階級間の闘争という視点で社会を見ています。人を違うグループに分けて、お互い闘争させて、社会をコントロールすることは左翼がよく使う方法です。子供の時からこのような思想を教え込んで、人種ではなく信念で一つの国になっているアメリカの伝統価値観を壊そうとしています。なぜなら、左翼の世界観を徹底的に教える前に、もともと存在する社会の価値観や秩序を壊す必要があるからです。地域や教材によって、白人の子供には生まれつきの罪があるので、自分の白人の家庭と分裂するようにと教えていることもあります。これはアメリカの家庭を重視する価値観を壊す方法でもあります。バイデンがホワイトハウスに入ってから、アメリカでシステム的な差別が存在すると言って、アメリカの小中学校で CRT 教育を進めようとしています。でも、アメリカで本当にシステム的な人種差別があるなら、オバマが大統領になれたはずがありません。CRT 理論を信じている人の中での過激な人は、人種の間に差があるので、だから大学受験は黒人に対する差別、数学は黒人に対する差別、優等生を集める学校やクラスは黒人に対する差別と主張しています。しかし、彼らは白人、特にアジア系は子供の教育にどれぐらいの力を入れているかについて全く考えていません。同じ人が NBA の優秀な選手はほぼ黒人で、それはアジア系や白人に対する差別であると思っていません。アメリカは人種ではなく、自由、民主などの信念で結ばれている国です。いろんな違う人がいて、各自が自分の特徴を発揮しているから、アメリカが成長してきました。しかし、このような教育をすると、一世代でアメリカが弱体化してきますし、人種間の対立がさらに激化して、社会がさらに分断して、安定しません。自分の子供がこのような教育を受けていることを見た親に少しでも常識があれば、このような教育は子供を破壊している、アメリカを破壊しているのがわかります。ですので、アメリカの各地で民主党を支持する親も、共和党を支持する親も、白人も黒人もラテン系もアジア系もこのことに対して反対の声を上げています。最近このことをめぐってたくさんのことが起きてますが、具体的な事例について機会があればまた皆さんに紹介したいと思います。このような反対活動が増えた後、もちろん感情が高揚する親も出てきます。それで、教育委員会は親が自分を脅迫したという理由で警察に通告した後、左翼メディアからバイデン政権の司法省まで、これらの親はアメリカの国内テロリストと言い出して逮捕された親もいました。しかし、BLM やアンティファがアメリカの多くの都市で破壊活動を行ったとき、左翼メディアは、それは言論の自由と報道して、それを支持していました。 今回の動画は FOX ニュースのタッカー・カルソンがそのことを批判した動画です。今回の話でタッカー・カルソンの批判と左翼メディアの歪んだ報道、親の行動などを見ることができます。彼は今回の話をアメリカの司法長官の家族の利益のところまで持ってきますが、これは今のアメリカで起きているこのことの理由のほんの一部に過ぎません。このような簡単な背景の紹介と、この一つの動画で、今のアメリカで何が起きているかを把握することが難しいかもしれませんので、これからも機会を見て皆さんに紹介していきたいと思います。正直、この動画はもう少し古い動画になってしまいました。日本語字幕の準備と動画の作成までいろんな理由で時間がかかってしまいました。また、彼の話のテンポが速いので、字幕が2行になっている部分も多く、少し見づらくなってますのでご了承ください。では、どうぞ。
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, if you lived in this country 15 years ago and you've got a good memory, you may remember the creation of something called the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. It was created back in 2005 when they re-upped the Patriot Act. Now, the point of the National Security Division, we were told at the time, was to conduct, quote, counterterrorism and counter-espionage operations against foreign adversaries. This was the big stuff. Mostly it was Islamic terror, which was the primary threat of that time. But these were also the people in charge of busting Chinese spies who were trying to steal our nuclear secrets, stopping suicide bombers and hijackings. Not small stuff, crimes that threaten the nation. That was then. Then Joe Biden became president in January, and the entire mission of the United States government changed and turned inward against you. A few days ago, the Department of Justice, under the radical Attorney General Merrick Garland, announced that the National Security Division has a new domestic mission. According to Garland, effective immediately, the National Security Division is handling the investigation of, quote, harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school board members, teachers, and workers in our nation's public schools, end quote. So the question is, who is threatening these teachers and school board members? Is it Al-Qaeda? Is it the Russian government? Is it ISIS-K? No. It's parents. Parents are angry about what's happening in schools. Why are they angry? Well, take a close look at the people Joe Biden has nominated to senior leadership positions in the Department of Education. Take a look at YouTube videos, while they still exist, of some of the school board meetings across the country over the past year. And you will know exactly why parents are mad. Parents who believe in things like biological sex, who oppose racial hierarchies imposed in pre-kindergarten classrooms, teaching kids to hate their parents. Those are the threat, according to the Biden administration. You'll notice if you look closely that nowhere in Merrick Garland's recent order or the DOJ's press release is any explanation of these, quote, threats of violence. What threats of violence? Has violence occurred at school board meetings? No. Look closer and you'll find this line, quote, the Justice Department will also create specialized training and guidance that will help school board members understand the type of behavior that constitutes threats. Oh, so it's a propaganda operation funded by you out of the Department of so-called Justice, designed to tell teachers and school board members that when parents complain, it's domestic terrorism. It's not the First Amendment in progress. It's not your constituents voicing legitimate complaints. It's effectively a foreign adversary trying to kill you. The Biden administration is trying to convince school board members using the Department of Justice that they are in physical danger from parents, and those parents are national security threats. Once again, nothing like this has ever happened in this country. This is an utter perversion of the mission and the power of the United States Department of Justice. It is almost impossible to overstate how sinister and crazy this is. We almost never play the equivalence game because it's tiresome, but in this case, it's hard to resist. Imagine if Donald Trump's DOJ designated, say, CNN anchors as domestic terrorists, put it in writing, and then told men with guns to enforce the law. How would that go over? We, for one, would be outraged by that. All decent Americans would. And it would, in fact, be less of a stretch than this order. A lot of CNN anchors made excuses for violence during the riots last year. But the media aren't upset about this. When powerless suburban parents resist having nihilistic ruling class ideologies imposed by force on their children, our media seem to believe it is perfectly fine to designate them terrorists and threaten them with firearms.
Version of America where school board meetings have become the new culture war battlegrounds, with children caught in the crosshairs, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively.
Right now, everyone from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers to QAnon influencers are trying to encourage their members, their followers, their maniacs to show up at school board hearings.
Some behavior is so bad, it's being compared to domestic terrorism.
This becomes a security crisis, in a sense, for the nation.
How one Republican senator is pretending school board harassment and intimidation aren't off the charts.
Similar tactics to what happened on January 6th that now are being turned against school boards nationwide in a trend that's really disturbing and sinister.
Conservatives manufactured outrage over masks and history lessons, took our school boards hostage like a bunch of screaming maniacs.
So the federal government has designated American parents who are unhappy with the education their children are receiving as domestic terrorists, and the media are defending it. This is so shameful, it's hard to describe. The entire point of a free press is to protect the weak from the strong. But as usual, and more flagrantly every day, our media does exactly the opposite. They slobber over billionaires, they defend the powerful, they call you a bigot if you challenge George Soros. And on the other hand, they clap like seals as working class people go to jail for thought crimes. They're trying to pretend that's not what they're doing, that they're not sucking up to power, that they're not the Praetorian Guard for the Biden administration, but they are. They're telling you this is about domestic terrorism. They're repeating Merrick Garland's own words. It has nothing to do with freedom of speech. On MSNBC this week, the daughter of a United States Senator, that would be Robert Menendez of New Jersey, one of the Biden administration's closest allies in the Senate, promised that she would air definitive proof that parents who dare to challenge the orthodoxies of the Joe Biden administration are in fact a grave threat to national security. She would show us proof that the National Security Division needs to investigate these parents, treat them like criminals, for daring to speak up at their own school board meetings before members of the school board they elected to run schools they pay for that educate their children. Here's the evidence she presented.
Frank, I want to play some more sound of these school board meetings so we can get a sense of just how out of control some of them are getting. Take a listen.
Don't put masks on our kids anymore, because I'm telling you what, I'm a mom who's fearless, and I will come after you.
You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse.
So, Frank, things have become so scary at these meetings that the organization representing school boards across the country is asking the federal government to help, arguing that the classification of these actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism.
So mothers stand up before a school board, which is their constitutional right, in fact, their duty as parents, to say that they believe, based on a lot of scientific evidence, that their children are being hurt by a policy that makes no sense. Imagine looking at that tape and blaming the moms and suggesting that their behavior is, quote, scary and they're terrorists and the FBI should show up at their house and hassle them like they're Al-Qaeda or ISIS-K, assuming that even exists. What did they say? Don't put masks on our kids anymore. It's child abuse. Well, actually, that's true. And anyone who's looked at the data knows that it's true. Belgian pediatricians, for example, and the Belgian Academy for Medicine, not a third world country, just issued this assessment of masks in school. Here it is, quote, testing children, imposing mouth masks and quarantines go against the principle of first do no harm, which is included in the Hippocratic Oath that doctors took. These drastic actions do much more damage to the children in the short and long term than going through the COVID infection itself, end quote. Now, that's not some angry mom from Laguna Beach. Those are physicians saying that. And if you look around, and you should, you will not find a single scientific study anywhere in the world that fundamentally contradicts that assessment. There is no science, none, behind these mask mandates for children. In fact, just days ago, Joe Biden's Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, tried to cite a study to back the administration's forced masking of children, which is a total outrage. And when he used this study to justify a political decision, the senior author of the study, Tracy Hogue, said Cardona had no idea what he was talking about and it completely misrepresented her research, which, by the way, had no control group. So by definition, doesn't prove anything. But don't bother. Don't even bother getting rational on this subject. If you dare to cite scientific conclusions, you are a domestic extremist, and the media will demand that you be investigated by the FBI. And they're justifying this in exactly the same way that the Chinese government explained away murders it committed in Tiananmen Square. They're accusing people who have been completely wronged by the government of undermining domestic stability by complaining about it. What used to be called legitimate civic disagreement is now a threat to the nation.
Is this really about people being upset about mask mandates? Or are there sort of underlying disruptive forces, white nationalists, anarchists, whatever in this country, that are using mask mandates and a public health crisis to sort of wage chaos?
Get that moron off television. That's hurting the country. I mean, come on now. They're racist now? They're racist because they don't want their kids to be masked? Imagine saying something like that. There are underlying forces at work. Secret forces you can't see. Must be QAnon or white supremacists. There are no organized white supremacist forces in this country. We have a lot of problems. That's not one of them. The point is, we don't like their politics, therefore they don't deserve civil liberties. That's what they're saying. That's what they believe. You have to wonder if any of these people have ever seen a school board meeting or if they're just repeating what they're told. It's not the parents who were causing chaos. They didn't start this. They had a totally ordinary and justified expectation that their kids would be educated, as kids have been educated in this country for more than 100 years, in public schools. The schools themselves changed. And parents slowly woke up to this fact. Their kids are being taught racism in schools. They're being hurt. What the hell are you doing? So parents go to meetings to voice objections to teachers who are advocating racial segregation and book burning, and they're doing it on camera. They're not doing it in secret. They're not plotting. This isn't the QAnon army. These are just normal Americans. Here's tape from Virginia back in May.
It's funny how they are so afraid of their children seeing another view of sexuality, gender, or religion. If you want to talk about books that are assigned, let's read To Kill a Mockingbird together. If you aren't willing to consider the racial trauma this assigned book causes black children with its white saviorism, then you have no business discussing any books.
Well, exactly. If you're telling kids that Dr. Seuss and To Kill a Mockingbird, both of which are explicitly anti-racist and were before that was even a term thought up by some grifter at Boston University, if you really believe that, you're a lunatic. And let's just say that out loud. You're a lunatic. And if you're complaining about it, you're not the one waging chaos. Look around on cable news and you won't find anybody explaining what's actually going on. Instead, you'll find people like Nicole Wallace barking about how people who don't agree with her don't deserve civil liberties. We almost never use her name on the air. Nicole Wallace is the physical embodiment of virtually everything that's wrong with this country. She is, in a word, loathsome. But let's be completely honest. If the federal government ever decided and then declared publicly that Nicole Wallace was a terrorist for her political opinions, we would unhesitatingly leap to her defense. With maximum vehemence, we would do it instantly and we wouldn't stop. Because we believe in civil liberties. Would she do the same for us? Of course not. If the entire staff of this show was arrested tomorrow for our beliefs, Nicole Wallace would celebrate. And that's the difference. We believe in civil liberties, and they don't. How can you tell? Has Nicole Wallace or anyone else at MSNBC said a single word about the federal government spying on people's Google searches? That's happening. Accidentally, the feds just unsealed court documents showing that the DOJ under Joe Biden has been obtaining sensitive private information from any American who typed in certain keywords into a Google search. A Minnesota judge, for example, recently approved a secret warrant requiring Google to provide tracking information on, quote, any user within the city of Edina, Minnesota, who searched a fraud victim's name. Oh. Is it a stretch to think that this could be extended to ideological crimes, which are the crimes the Biden administration really cares about? No, it's not a stretch at all. In fact, of course, it's happening. And no one on television even mentions it because they think you deserve it, because they don't think you have civil liberties, because they don't believe in God. Therefore, they don't think you got those rights from God. They thought you got them from the government and they could be taken away because you've been naughty. And so they applaud when they're taken away. Google collects an awful lot of tracking information on its users, including their names, home addresses, browsing history going back decades. So that's a story you would expect a lot of people on the left would be concerned about. If it was 20 years ago, they would be. The ACLU would be all over it. It's proof, once again, that the government has too much surveillance power over American citizens, and they are abusing this to spy on Americans who've done nothing wrong. But not one of the national security experts, so-called in MSNBC or CNN, will even mention it. Why is that? Because their job isn't to protect you or civil liberties, but to protect the party in power. That could be why they're not telling you anything about Merrick Garland's personal stake, the Attorney General's personal stake in persecuting people who challenge the insanity we're seeing in school boards across the country. It turns out Merrick Garland's daughter is married to a man who is the co-founder of an education service company called Panorama Education, which you will not be surprised to learn provides materials on critical race theory to school districts, including dismantling, quote, unconscious bias and systemic racism in schools. Oh, so the thing that parents are complaining about is the thing that Merrick Garland's family is getting rich from. 2 days ago, Merrick Garland just made it a crime to complain about the beliefs that are enriching his family. Does that make sense? You should know that this specific company has raised a ton of money from Mark Zuckerberg's foundation. Fairfax County Public Schools just signed a $1.8 million contract with Panorama to conduct a multi-year social and emotional learning screener that gives them the right to collect, quote, psychometrics on the school district students. Do you realize they're collecting psychometrics on your kids? What is a psychometric anyway? This is insane. Some of the questions ask whether students are, quote, sad or, quote, gender fluid. It's all making Merrick Garland's family rich. This is horrifying. It's also potentially illegal. According to the DOJ's own conflict of interest policy, it raises serious ethical issues, but of course it does. The DOJ rules require employees to seek official guidance before, quote, participating in any matter in which his or her impartiality could be questioned. Oh, that would include situations in which matters can, quote, affect the financial interests of a relative with whom the DOJ employee has a close relationship. That would probably include your daughter, Merrick Garland. Did you do that? You can be assured that no one at the DOJ's National Security Division is investigating that question tonight. Instead, they're promising to go after people, to designate people like Elena Fishbein domestic terrorists.